Hello, everyone, and welcome to the OperaWire podcast, the first ever edition of the OperaWire podcast, I might add. I am David Salazar, one of the co-founders of OperaWire, and I'm here with my brother Francisco, who is also the co-founder of OperaWire. And our intention with this podcast is quite simple. We want to just discuss between the two of us, occasionally with guests, the hot burning topics of the opera world.
Hi guys, I'm Francisco Salazar. I'm one of the co-founders, as Dave just introduced me. And yes, we've been wanting to do this podcast for a long time, and it's so wonderful that we're finally getting this started. And we're just really excited to talk about opera and the world that's going around us, and everything opera. So I guess because it's the end of the 2024-25 season, I guess we wanted to kick it off by, I guess, saying goodbye to this season as summer seasons start, and just going and having a little retrospective about what we saw this season, our favorite performances, some of our disappointments, some standout performances, and just really just going through some of the things that we really enjoyed this season, which is always a great way to start, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, though, for people who are not Opera Wire readers on a consistent basis or who don't really know me and you, I mean, I think it is really important to remind them that we've been doing Opera Wire. It's going to be 10 years
Yeah.
next year. We're going to complete our ninth year at the end of this year. And Opera Wire very much grew from a passion of what we're going to discuss in this conversation.
Yes.
Me and you, growing up in a household with a father who was passionate about opera, who wanted us to love opera, and for a while we didn't, and then eventually we did, as we both grew up musicians, violinists, and you a cellist. We did kind of start to appreciate opera, and there came a point where we had a little blog where we were writing our impressions, and me and you always had really fascinating conversations. We still do about things that we love, things that we don't love, things that we agree, things that we don't disagree on. And, in mapping out what our first episode for this podcast would be after, again, nearly 9 years doing this, I think we both agreed that it would be nice to just do a recap, the things that we loved, the things that disappointed us, the things that intrigued us, the performers that blew us away. Over the course of, I guess, what, 9 months, the last 9 months, 9 months where we've been here in New York where we live, but also where we've had an opportunity to travel. So I guess I'll throw it to you. Where do you want to start? Where in the world do you want to start?
I think it's really fascinating that we were able to travel this year. You were in Tokyo for the new Theater of Tokyo. I was in Italy for La Scala's opening night. We also went to Berlin, where we were able to go to both the Deutsche Oper Berlin and the Berlin State Opera. And I went to Houston. I went to the Houston Grand Opera for the first time. So there was so many exciting performances that we were able to go to. I mean, I know I always look forward to the Teatro La Scala's opening night production. I think this season was very special. Forza
You've
del
done it. You've
Destino.
done it. You've done it a few years in a row now.
Yes. And this season was Forza del Destino. It's a special work because the first time you and I saw the work was in 2006, and it was Deborah Voigt. And then I got to see it.
Salvatore Di Citra.
Yes. And then I got to see it in Parma, and I saw it at the Met. So I've seen the work. It's very rarely performed. So this was special because it was opening the Teatro La Scala's season, and it was a special cast. Ludovic Tetsier, Anna Netrebko, Brian Jade were leading it. But what I really was intrigued about wasn't that the singers were not going to be great. They were great. It was the production. I have to say this was one of the most interesting productions I've seen in a while. It's not modern, but it is in a way modern because it takes the work into different time periods. You start in one time period and you go over different time zones, and I think it's really wonderful because it connects war from I want to say 18th century into the modern day, and it basically gives us a time span and saying like the world doesn't change; it just continues in the same exact space, and we really get a get to know and see like how this work connects in, because it does take place throughout many years,
Yeah.
but it's not as long as 18th century into modern 21st century, but he connects it so smoothly and so seamlessly that it doesn't really you don't really see that. And I feel like that was one of the most effective productions I saw all year. And again, it's very traditional at the beginning, and then it kind of just also um moves into this modernism without like having something so austere that you want to that you're not really sure what you're watching. It's very modern, but also in a very traditional set. And what I also really loved is that we've talked about this turntable for so
Mm.
many productions, and this turntable actually I think works because we're seeing this performers actually be able to move through the scene as the action's actually moving through a different time period. So I really just loved the use of the turntable, the use of the modernism. Of course, the performances were fabulous. Ricardo Chailly, I think, is hands down one of the best Verdi conductors in the world, and Italian conductors also in the world. And there's a reason why he's maintained his reputation for so many years.
For context, anyone that heard me just snicker a little bit about my brother bringing up the turntable, we're talking about as a rotating stage, um, which is very much something that's used in a lot of modern opera productions, usually for transitions from scene to scene. You'll have part of a scene on one half of the circle, and then they'll rotate it to reveal the next part. And what we've often seen, especially local productions at the Met, that overuse this device too many times in a production to create a quote unquote cinematic quality or feel. But again, it's a diminishing returns thing when you overuse a certain device, and when you start to see it as an audience member used across different productions in the same way, it starts to lose its impact. So I snickered a little bit because most of the time nowadays when you start seeing it, it's groan inducing. It's very few times where I personally like that kind of theatrical technique in opera because I don't think it's often used effectively anymore.
Right.
um and to your point about like the Verdi, the balance of a modern production like that, I do think that for me personally, I mean, I'm very we're both. I know that you like more of a traditional aesthetic than me, and I'm much more broad in how I like to think in terms of the director's intentions. You and I, as film directors as well,
Right.
understand what that means. But I think for me this year, what was really kind of interesting was when we went to Berlin and we saw two of those Regie Theater productions there, where we hadn't really, well, we encountered newer,
Right.
more challenging productions. Occasionally they come to the Met. It's a rare occurrence. And, in other theaters in Europe that we've gone to, kind of seen a little bit of that, and I feel like
Yeah.
part of it was that we were picking what we were interested in trying.
Right.
But here I felt like we were very confronted by it. To see a Turandot that was, that actually I think did a beautiful, interesting job with exploring the totalitarian, authoritarian aspect of that story. That Turandot's whole, she's as much a prisoner of that tradition and the performative nature of those riddles and those games for the
Right.
audience to see this murder of these men just so that the regiment, her father, the king, can keep his power. I think it was actually really powerful, and obviously considering world events and
Yeah.
all of that, which we will try not to bring in. But just a reminder that this production reminder that opera is very much political, and just like you said with the Verdi production,
Yeah.
Verdi himself was a politician at one point in his life, and so it's very difficult sometimes to avoid those topics. But in this
Exactly.
case, it did very much present, and the way that the stage is created, right, with the audience looking into the very front of the stage, and then us as the audience being reflected there, it
Hmm.
was very much a mirror of our social society, and that was a really interesting production that I very much enjoyed and I very much loved. Not to mention that I think the cast featured one of the singers that, I mean, and last night at Carnegie Hall, so we're recording this on June 5th. I was at Carnegie, I'm June 6th, excuse me, and I was at Carnegie Hall on June 5th. Sayoa Hernandez, performing as Turandot and then doing this concert last night at the Carnegie Hall of Spanish music. I don't understand. I mean, I understand why, but she is just an incredible instrument. Imperious is the word that comes to mind. Maybe because of the roles that I saw her and because of the concert I saw last night, but just she just stands there on the stage and she just has this electric presence with combined with this titanic voice. I mean, it's massive.
I remember that when I first encountered her, it was at the Teatro La Scala's opening season production of Attila, and that season I remember that we were following her career because she had all this like she had a Royal Opera House debut as well, and she was basically breaking out into having her breakout year, and I remember that there was just so many interesting productions, and I was discovering her voice, and it's an incredible voice. And I think as Turandot, I didn't get to see the Carnegie Hall concert, but as Turandot, I think that
You missed an epic night.
I can imagine. I was very, 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 very sad not to go because in the Deutsche Oper Berlin, which is a much smaller hall than Carnegie Hall, the voice just completely like it just resonated with
Yeah.
such a huge.
Waves of sound.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so I was very happy to finally be able to see her after years of following her career and being able to actually experience the real deal. And this is a turandot I think is one of the best turandots that I have seen in my entire life. She can sing a piano and she can sing this huge forte, and the voice just has so many different colors. And her acting can be subtle, it can be big, but it has so many layers. And I think that for me, it's one of the I guess I don't want to say discoveries, but in a way, it was like rediscovering an artist that I had come to admire, and I was not disappointed, but I just got what I was
I
expecting, and
mean,
I think I got more.
I was blown away, and yeah, obviously she's having an amazing career in Europe. I do wish at some point, for selfish reasons, that she would come to the Met because I think she would fit right in there. And I think
Yep.
that, I mean, she has the physical, imposing presence, like you said, the incredible acting ability, but overall, just the epic voice to
Yeah.
match that. I mean, and I say this lovingly, cavernous theater. It's a huge hall. It's
Yeah.
massive. Um, I think that she would fit right in that. And like you said, for me, it's like of if when I look back at this season and the performers that really resonated with me, that I was like, wow, thank God I got the opportunity to be here. She's
Hmm.
like right at the top of the list. You know, the other one we saw just a couple of weeks ago, Arsen Sogmoyon,
Yeah.
in Queen of
The Queen of
Spades,
Spades.
because that was another one where I was like, wow, what a voice. What a voice, what power, you know. And also German is a very complicated, complex
Yeah.
role, you know. It's very challenging to take on an opera like that where you're essentially an anti-hero, and to do it with the kind of ambiguity and the layers and this, there's a bitterness in some moments, there's kind of hints of like the romanticism in others, and then there's the anger and the bitterness, the whole scene with Violeta Romana, where he's kind
Yeah.
of like
Oh,
she's stunned there and like she's just like staring at him, and you can see this guy just kneeling down. At the beginning, he's just crying and he's begging, and then his voice starts taking on more aggressive quality, and he's just getting more and more intense, and it's building, and there's this fury behind it, and it's like a volcano about to erupt. That's what I was going that was going through my mind as I'm listening to this, experiencing this. And funnily enough, it was a moment where, you know, he was also, you know, moving about because he was trying to stay with the
right.
conductor. But at the same time, it was so riveting, it was so intense. And that was like, I was like, wow. And that was the whole night. The whole night I was just like enraptured by this guy's incredible, just the voice, the presence. Another incredible debut at the Met. Very
And,
fortunate to have that.
and that of course included the return of Violeta Romana from 2007, since the first time she sang at the Met since 2017. And I had seen her Joconda, and I had seen her. We saw her Aida, um, and this was, I didn't know what to expect because obviously she's now in a different phase of her career. I've always loved her voice. Obviously, the voice changes as the years go by, and quite one of the most surprising moments was her aria, and just the fact that she was able to give us that amazing and hushed pianissimo sound that just resonated with such warmth and haunt. I mean, it was probably, Arson was amazing, but that was probably another moment of the evening where I was like stunned. I could not believe what I was hearing. I it was chilling. It was chilling
I mean,
because a lot of yeah, I hadn't heard that sound in so many years.
no, for me, that was also kind of like a wow, because it is one of those pulls you in moments that you just like, just enraptured, right? All goes still. And I mean, the whole performance was just
Yeah,
that whole performance of the Queen of Spades for me was just one of the best of the whole year. Sonia Yoncheva also
yeah,
sang that performance, and she was incredible. I mean, the whole connection between her highs and her lows during her final aria. I mean, the elegance of her phrasing. I just there's just for me it was just like there's such a fluidity of line throughout
yeah,
that I mean, I've heard her several times. She's an incredible instrument. She's an incredible artist. Obviously, there's things you're gonna love, things you're not gonna love. This was one of those things where I was just like, wow, what presence, what energy, what like just dominance and confidence on stage. That was I mean, like the whole thing, the whole cast was just top rate. And again, this is a production that is just very subtly brilliant. The blocking for me has always been really intelligent. The German is always kind of this character on the margins. He
mhm,
wants to be the center of attention. He wants what other people have. And this production just does an amazing job from where, clothing him fully in black to having him constantly on the edge of the mise en scène. Um, it's not a huge gesture, but it's so effective in throughout the opera. Um, just wow. I mean, just that was the perfect way to end my Met Opera season and just overall wrap up my opera productions that I will be seeing in 24, 25.
yeah.
Um,
I
you know,
agree.
yeah, that was
I
that was
agree
definitely one of
completely.
them.
And the thing is, it's a production that dates back to the 90s, and it's an Elijah Mashinsky production, and it dates back to the Joseph Volpi era of the Metropolitan Opera. And there was another production that we saw that's also from the Joseph Volpi era that I think is probably one of the best Metropolitan Opera productions that has ever been conceived. In recent history, and it's unfortunate that it has not received an HD to this day, and that's Herbert Wernicke's production of Die Frau und Schotten. I think hands down, when we went into that, we were really excited. It's a work that I personally adore, and I know that
Music.
you really love it.
Music.
Um, I'll never forget the first time I saw it, back a few years back, and I was very excited for this production because I love the music.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the performers, I mean, they were top notch. I mean, Nina Stemmer was back as the nurse. Lisa Lindstrom, she was doing, oh my God, uh, I
The,
can't,
the wife, the
the wife,
character of
yes, yes, yes,
yes,
yes, the Dyer's
the
wife,
Dyer's wife. Yeah, the Dyer's wife.
yes.
Yes,
um, Elsa van den Heever, the Countess, Russell Thomas
Empress, the
was doing,
Empress, the
yeah,
Emperors.
the
Yeah.
Empress. I'm sorry, yes. Russell Thomas was doing the Emperor, and of course Michael Volet, who's just I think one of the greatest bass baritones in the world right now. Um, and I think all this quintet of singers, you couldn't get anything. You could not find anything better right now
I
than
mean,
that
the
cast.
casting was just genius.
Yeah,
You have the different kinds of because I mean, you basically have three sopranos on stage,
yeah,
uh, and they're all these epic voices. Like it's very easy to just have everyone kind of sound the same, right? And yet everyone, all of these artists just had such a distinct vocal characterization for what they were doing. Elza von Ben Heaver had this like this purity and this
right.
just it was just beautiful. Everything came out of her mouth was just beautiful. And then you have Lisa Lindstrom who had much more of a rougher approach to her character, which fit, right? And those
Yeah,
contrasts really and then of course then within that you have the dynamic with Michal Bola, who was also just playing it so warm and gentle in contrast with Lisa Lindstrom, who was much harsher. I mean, just and then of course you had Russell Thomas as being just epic tenor, held
yep.
in tenor sound. I'd love to hear him do more of that kind of repertoire because it was absolutely beautiful. But yeah,
And
just the
Strauss does not give the tenor any grace
no, no, no,
whatsoever.
no, no, no. It's rough, but that yeah, the whole kind of conjugation of voices, just that whole combination was the casting was brilliant. That's
Yeah,
that for me. If you have to like pick cast of the year, just that for me was it because you just at first it's a hard opera to cast, but
yeah,
just to be able to find the right people who have just such distinct vocal qualities that elevate the characters, right? Just by what they already possess in their instruments.
yeah.
Um, wow. I mean that
and
that
and we have to say, I often, have my qualms sometimes with Yannick Nézet-Séguin, but that night, I think that's one of the greatest works that he's conducted. That and Bluebeard's Castle, which he did in this at the end of last season, I think are some of my favorite works that I've seen him conduct. And there's just this power and this force that he gives to the orchestra that I wish he could do more often with other works, but it's fine. I think everyone has their strengths, and I think Yannick is still finding his strengths, and I think with Die Frau Schotten, he definitely elevated the orchestra to something that I hadn't heard from him in a while.
I mean I will agree with you that I mean the HD situation at the Met is a very touchy subject because obviously we also I mean things have shifted, right? Like we also grew up in our 20s growing up in our 20s, but like in the early 2000s when Peter Gilp took over and started doing this live in HT, um it just became kind of like a more of a legacy kind of thing too, right? These are
Right.
the most crucial performances of the year, where the biggest stars are going to be spotlighted. And so over the years, sure, it is obviously we live in a business. It is a business, sorry, and there is a monetary benefit to it post pandemic with movie theaters and all of that business
Right.
model also kind of in flux. Um, Outside of New York and big cities, of course, because you can go to a movie theater in New York City, and I've had really great experiences with packed theaters recently. But anyways, just to keep it on target, it's in flux, and obviously there's financial considerations, so you want to play the hits all the time. But for posterity's sake, I mean, like, will we ever get a chance to see this magnificent production on screen? The other one for me that was, I mean, there were three other egregious lack of HDs this year, and I guess that's a good thing too because it speaks to the fact that the Met had some really strong performances this
Yes.
season. Um, Queen of Spades, obviously.
Yes.
Moby Dick, incredible piece.
I think it's it.
And it's a new production, and it's a new opera. I mean, it's a Met premiere of an opera, a truly great, in my opinion, new opera. And then Aina de Mar, another contemporary
Yes.
work
Yes.
that it's short, but really, really powerful. And also, I just think it's a missed opportunity to have a piece that's both opera, but also so much more than opera. Lose out an opportunity to bring in another audience that might not necessarily because again we're in the opera industry you're in contest with not only all the other art forms and all the other things out there but also people's preconceived notions of opera. And
Yeah,
so
for sure.
your goal with contemporary opera is to shift the audience perspective, amplify it, then as the leading company in the world, probably, right, by
Yeah.
name recognition,
Hmm.
and your goal is you're putting these contemporary works on stage. And Ainada Mar is very much, I mean, sure, it's very focused on Spanish culture, you could argue, but Latin American culture because it's an Argentine composer.
Right, but it also has an LGBT component as well.
But it has a global appeal.
Yeah,
You could argue that maybe like something like Moby Dick might not because it's the great American novel and it's an American composer, and so maybe Europe does not care. But Ainada Mar is different, and it's also short. So you just already tearing through a lot of the stereotypes that most mainstream audiences have about opera, and you're giving yourself a chance to broaden the appeal for the art form
but think of the
via an art form. I'm sorry. Let me just finish this thought. Via an art form, cinema, that it already benefits because this production very much benefits can benefit from a cinematic approach. So I think that was a lost opportunity for one of the best performances. Another production that I thought was a standout this year.
Well,
Um,
you know,
and
I do want to go in and I want to say world music today has become very inspired by different cultures. And I think, and this is nothing to do with opera, but I think if you look at, for example, some of the most streamed artists on Spotify or in the world, they happen to be Latin American artists. So Ainay Amar has a lot of Latin American inspired music, but at the same time, it also has a theatrical element, and it also uses different forms of theater and different forms of music to express what it wants to do. So yes, it's opera. Yes, it can be fado. Yes, it can be in Spanish, but but it transcends more than just one type of work. And I think
I think
that
you
if
meant
we
to say
look
flamenco, not fado.
yes,
Fado's
flamenco, sorry,
Portuguese.
it's flamenco, sorry, yes. But I think if you look at how the world has changed and the types of music that they're listening to, you can't say that now American audiences or world audiences are only listening to music in English or their language. They're listening to all types of music because music transcends language and barriers. And I think that when you want to do HDs, you have to think about that. And yes, we can do Aida 100 times on HD, and we could do Barber Seville 100 times on HD, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to come back and watch those same works. They will, but they want to also explore and see. And I think audiences are also changing. And Aina Amar for me was an experience that I could not shake off after
I mean, I
seeing
went
it.
to see it three
See it three
times.
times.
I
Yes,
went
I
to
was
see
going to
it
say
three
that.
times.
And I remember leaving the theater just shook because of what I had seen, the impact of the music, the dance, the choreography, the production, which I think was beautiful. I mean, the cast was also very good. I mean, Elena Villalon's final scene where she's not singing, she's
Incredible.
really just
The
emoting. And
monologue, yeah, yeah, yeah. The
the
poetry
monologue is
recital,
just
yeah.
spectacular. And Daniela Mack, what an imposing presence and voice. And Angel Blue like surprised me with her Spanish diction. I understood everything she was singing, and she's singing it with so much intention. Um, and just
And
that
I
whole
saw Gabriela Reyes'
yes, you
performance
did.
too, and that was again, Angel was incredible too. Everyone's doing something differently. Gabriela Reyes also, she got one performance.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know how the program. I'm not gonna talk about casting or programming or whatever because I'm not gonna put one artist over the other. They
right,
both demand the same respect. I thought it was kind of weird that she got one performance because she was phenomenal in that one opportunity that she got.
right,
Not taking away from anyone. It's I'm not. That's not my job, and it's not. I don't know what goes behind the scenes. I do
right,
have a lot of questions about some of the behind the scenes choices at the Met.
right.
In this particular case, I don't know what happened there, but the one performance that we did get, thank God we got it because she was fantastic.
Yeah, no, I didn't get to see that one, but I again, I was really just shocked by this performance and by this entire work. And I know that ticket sales were not as great as they would have expected, but I do hope that we get another chance to see this work at the Met and in the future, and that we can continue to bring this type of artwork because I think it will eventually engage a new generation, a new audience, and it is a masterpiece. I think it's a master work of modern work. And me, I am not the uh, I don't always love a lot of the modern works, but I still go see them and I give them a chance, and I think that's always really important because that's the only way that we get
I
to
mean,
learn.
look, it's not, and as we shift toward maybe potentially a little bit more of a negative
Right,
conversation. I mean, look, the reality is, if we go back through the history of opera, not every, we're looking through the lens of the 21st century where there's been established like repertoire, a canon for over
right,
a century, basically at this point, right? And the canon expands, and you bring in a couple of works, and usually they're by already established composers in the
exactly.
canon. Occasionally, some Donizetti operas will start being allowed into the canon, or some like Verdi work that was kind of neglected for a while, like Attila, suddenly starts getting a little bit more love. But let's not forget that there was probably thousands and thousands of operas that we have no idea about during those
Exactly.
eras that no one cares about because, well, maybe they're just not good. And that's okay. Verdi also had a couple of clunkers. Wagner disowned a few of his own operas. I don't think anyone cares about Puccini's early works either. And that's okay. It's a reality, right? So when we look at that, I think we do talk a lot about from that perspective. So, new modern works, there's this, and part of it is the scarcity, right? And, at big houses like the Met, they were going to do six a year. Now they're back to four. Now they're down to three next year. And so, unfortunately, because of the economics of the situation, but also because of the PR of the situation, those operas got the expectations for what those operas are supposed to do. Like,
Right.
that's the one that got picked. So why did that one get picked over the others of dozens of modern operas that could be in that place, right? Well, that opera has to justify its existence, right?
Right.
And it has a lot of pressure to justify that existence. So, you know, sometimes you get Ainada Mars, sometimes you get Moby Dicks. Both of them have a history before the Met. And then,
Right.
unfortunately, you have the other two contemporary works that they performed this year. Anthony and Cleopatra, which, John Adams is a legend. Your Dr. Atomic is a great work. Nixon in China is a great work. I might get a lot of flack. I do think that Death of Klinghoffer is a great work. Anthony and Cleopatra was not for me. I
Right.
found it very dry, boring, uninteresting. He's adapting Shakespeare, but I didn't feel any of the drama inherent in Shakespeare. I was very disappointed by the performers were amazing. Julia Bullock and Gerald Finley are
Definitely.
insanely talented, and their chemistry was just on fire. I mean, it was very palpable. But the opera itself musically was just blah.
Right.
My words, my opinion. I can't articulate better because the reality is that I was just sitting there and I was like, I feel like the music just accompanying the text.
Right.
And while maybe that's the intention you had for it, I much rather just get rid of the music and let these people act without it. It does not
Right.
use this adding nothing to the experience except expanding the experience in the worst possible way. So
And and I might add, I felt the same when I went to see Grounded. Again, I think Emily D'Angelo, Ben Bliss, the cast was very good, the singers were very good. I mean, I just didn't really the whole experience had said nothing to me. I felt that the opera was too long. It just felt eternal. I just felt that there were a couple of ideas here. There were some beautiful melodies that just never went anywhere, in my opinion. And
it felt like
that's
a
not to
mishmash of ideas.
exactly, and that's not to say that's not anything against a composer like Janine Tesori. I am sure that she is a wonderful composer, and I know she has done some wonderful work. I just personally, this work Grounded didn't speak to me, and I know there was a lot of like talk about it. I know there was re-edits from the Washington National Opera, but I just, I sat there and I said, this could have been an opera that could have been great, but I also don't think it was the proper work to open a season. I always find that opening a season should be, I don't know, it should be something
I
to
mean, it's a
celebrate. And
statement
I
of
just felt,
intent. It's a
sure, but
statement
I
of
don't
intent,
think
but
that it's but there should be, I don't know, there should be, I don't want to say glamorous or like, but there should be something where you feel like you're leaving with a smile. And I just felt that this was me leaving bored and saying, what is this next season going to look like? I think that opening night should really set a strong hold for your season. And I just felt like Grounded was the wrong way to start for a very good season, because I think this was one of the strongest seasons in a couple of years for the Met, with really strong casts, with really good productions, and just overall really good musicality. And I think
I'm
Grounded was started on the wrong foot.
I'm gonna push back on what you said because I mean, I understand that that's your point of view, and and,
Of
and
course.
there was a lot of shoulds in there, by the way. Um, I don't. I mean, it's opera. Opera
Yeah,
is heightened, and a lot of it's tragic. I mean, and so I don't. I mean, the year before we had Dead Man Walking, which is probably
which was
even more
not a
tragic.
which was not interesting for me at all. I did not like that evening either.
Fair enough. I thought it was a beautiful opera. It is a statement of intent, and it is an opportunity to bring in audiences that are just there for the hoopla of the opening night event. So
Right.
I do think that that kind of an opportunity provides you the place to put a piece that you want to bring attention to, that you think might help expand the art form and show its possibilities. So a contemporary work does fit that billing in the sense that people that usually don't engage with opera will be there to engage with
Right.
a topic that will potentially feel right at home because it's something that they would expect to see somewhere else, or that they wouldn't expect from opera precisely. Like, again, Grounded is about the Iraq War. And in theory, okay, like most people that are going to be in that audience have an opinion about that.
Right.
So while, yeah, an opera about the military in the current regime and situation, maybe not something that people want to live with, but, and this was, again, this was pre-election, so whatever, a lot of opinions there too. I do think that the bigger issue with the work is that it fumbled itself. Like the libretto is all over the place, and this is an adaptation of a one woman show.
Right.
So I don't know what the original play is. Again, I'm not particularly familiar with Janine Tesori's work, so I don't think it's fair to qualify her based on one experience with one opera. But the opera itself, as a work that speaks for itself, unfortunately, is a mumble jumble of different ideas, a libretto that's overlong, that kind of shifts its focus too radically, and then unfortunately, when it finally does build to a moment where we might actually get some sort of a release or some sort of a expanded solo moment where we can finally maybe engage with the character, the central character, a little bit more and get to know her even deeper, it just ends on a whimper. And like you said, that is kind of a big downer. I mean, the whole night was frustrating to deal with, and then the so much of the great operas, what really like pulls you through to the end, even if the rest of the evening can be a little long, is just a really strong ending. Like so many really good operas, maybe not even the great ones, some just really solid operas, they just stick around because they end really well. This one
Well,
did
I mean,
not.
we can talk about beautiful endings like the ending of the Queen of Spades, which it
But
does
that's a
take its
great opera
time.
through and through, in my
Right.
opinion. I don't think it
Okay.
has any.
Right, and but that gives us a closure into a character, or we can talk about Aida, which was our New Year's Eve uh, the opening production, and which, quite frankly, was a very anticipated production, and that has one of the best, I think, greatest endings of all time with O Terradio. Um, this was one of the most anticipated productions of the year, and I think
You
we were
just
all.
wanted to he does a great opera. You just wanted to transition to this topic of conversation.
Of course. I mean, we're talking about disappointments, so we're just gonna go and talk about it. I think that after they had retired the Sandra Frissel production, there was an anticipation for a new production at the Met and what was it gonna look like. And I saw when I saw the first concepts when they announced it in 2021, 22. um, I wasn't very excited about it, and I think that what I got was exactly what I expected, and it was just a mumble jumble of unfinished ideas, and it was unfortunate because I think the first cast um, really suffered from a lot of multiple things. First, because the half of the cast was ill. I know you were at the opening night, which was
So for
unfortunate.
context for listeners, and we haven't been good about providing context for a lot of the things that we're talking about, I think, um, especially people that are not familiar with these things. But you can always read our reviews at OperaWire, and we can provide a little bit more context there. But I'm going to provide some context for this Aida because the Sonia Frissel was very much a traditional approach to this epic ode to Egypt. There is some exoticism there, but obviously
Of
Verdi's
course.
composing in the 1800s, so can't really get away from that. Um, so that context aside, this production kind of takes from the Broadway play, which starts off in a museum where a young couple shows up and they see a painting, and then they're whisked away on this journey of this ancient Egyptian tale. Here, it's just a bunch of like archaeologists who discover some
Tombs.
tombs, and they start kind of like taking and excavating, and I guess there is a hint of like criticism of colonialist ideas. I don't
Is
really.
there really?
I mean, I
What
might be being
criticism is
generous
it?
because then, there's the whole processional scene in the middle of at the end of Act 2 where they take all this stuff and they run away with all of the
Sure.
artifacts that have been buried, right? And then there's these like two lovers that are archaeologists and they kind of find themselves and then they run off into the tombs. It's a framing device for that we can go into a flashback mode and bring back the characters of Aida and Radames and Amneris and Ramphis and Amonasro, but the framing device kind of like just kind of
Gets
disappears in the
lost?
final half, which is and the opera is better for it. The production is better for it once the archaeologists kind of disappear. But for the most of the first half of the opera, because the opera basically gets presented Act One, Act Two, intermission, then Act Three, Act
Right.
Four. Most of Act One, you have the archaeologists running around, and I mean, at the beginning of the opera starts with like an Indiana Jones style scene where a rope comes down, an archaeologist comes down, and the night that I saw it, opening night, the New Year's Eve performance, the guy literally fell, a big thud, and then that kind of set the tone for the whole night because unfortunately, and I'm going to be very critical about this, and I was extremely critical in my review about it, and I got a lot of response from people from it. Piotr Bikchawa, the tenor, was ill. And obviously, he's one of the star attractions for the performance. In a big, meaty role, he was ill. He should not have sung. From the beginning, you could tell he was negotiating his voice. He was having a very hard time at the top. He was cracking consistently. Um, Celeste Aida was not good. Then there's a lot of ensembles for Radamés, so he can kind of hide a little bit. He doesn't have to go for it, but you can tell he wasn't going for the high notes.
Right.
He wasn't doing anything with that. He should not have gone beyond that because at that point it's passable. The guy's not feeling well, you move on. That's the point where, and by the way, at intermission, a couple behind me was like, oh, they were thinking that he just wasn't good,
Right.
that it just wasn't up to the task. I don't think that these people are necessarily like opera aficionados or goers. They were just there because it's New Year's. Again, going back to these event nights where people that usually don't come to the opera are coming to the opera for the novelty of New Year's at the Met. And so suddenly this is what you're presenting to this audience, but are also paying top dollar because these are not cheap tickets. He should not have gone on beyond that night. Now, I don't know who was making those calls. I don't know who's making those decisions, but whether it's the general manager or the board of directors above him, has got to make the call and say, guys, we need the cover. I don't know what happened with the cover. I don't know if the cover was sick also. I don't know what the backup plan was, but this guy was sick and he had said he was sick a week before. So there
And the
should have
thing
been
is,
a
and the
go.
thing is, it's a gala evening, so people are paying high prices for this. They're gonna be doing a dinner afterwards. So yes, this is a respect for the audience, and I think that these are human beings, and singers are allowed to be sick, and they're allowed to call in sick. They shouldn't go on when they're not feeling well,
Act
and we
three and
just
four, Act 3 and 4 was unforgivable.
right.
First of all, Big Chawa just couldn't do it. He couldn't sing high notes. He was basically bringing things down the octave. I mean, it got to the point where you're not even bothering with anyone else. I mean, it is kind of sabotaging everyone else's performance because you're just worried about whether or not I mean, what is once a tenor is just cracking on every single note, what else is there to worry about? Like, is the guy just gonna like burst his vocal cords on the stage? Like, does he need to start bleeding out of his mouth before someone tells him to stop or someone drags him off? Like it was disrespectful to the audience. It was probably the worst opera experience of my life. The worst single word, and I know that one of the worst opera experiences of your life was in Aida in Prague
Yes.
several years ago, for
Yes.
different reasons.
For a
Because
lot
all
of
the
different.
singers there were past these roles. It,
Yeah.
it wasn't the thing they should have been doing at the time. But for me, like when I go through like the history of like what I've seen as an opera goer, probably now consistently for 20 years, this is I'm struggling to find anything that resonates with this. I can label it as the worst. And for me, it's not on Bikchawa. And if he's the one that decided to go and to continue and force himself on stage, then yeah, it's on him. But I'm sorry, there's got to be a quality control. There's got to be someone above that says, this is not what our audience deserves. I don't care if the tenor wants to go on stage. I don't care if he wants to sing because, for whatever reason he wants to keep going and doing whatever he's got to do. Those are the people that are in charge.
Well,
That's not the
the thing is, a few years back when they were doing the Sonia Frissell uh, production, the last run, a singer got fired after a performance that wasn't great. Um, and I
Yeah, and then it
witnessed
was
that.
publicized on the
And
New York Times. Yeah,
yeah,
that was
and
the reason.
that was the reason. So you already have an experience with a bad Aida, and then you're going and you're giving this, and you're seeing the first act. You have to cut the cord. You have to say, you're not going on. We're moving with the next person. Even if it's a gala performance, even if it's the opening night, you need to respect your audience. I got to see Big Chaya not healthy a few performances later, and I have to say he was actually, and I wish you would have been able to see that performance. I think he was the best part of that first cast of Aida. I think the production, was unfortunate, and I think both of us saw the production twice. Once in the winter, and then in the spring we went to see it because Alina Garancha was returning to the Met after many years. um, I think that after seeing it a second time, I have to say the production did not improve. It actually, I think, looks older than it did in the winter, and I think that this is a production, in my opinion, that should be moved and changed, or we should go back to something. A few years back, when La Scala opened their season with the Dmitry Chernyakov's production of La Traviata, it was booed out. They disliked it, and what did La Scala have to do? They went back to their old production of Liliana Cavani's Traviata from the '90s, and that's the one that they're currently using. I think when you see that a production doesn't work, you don't throw away the old one immediately. You archive it and you see if it works. If the new one is not working, and you go back to the classic. I think this is the type of production that did not need to be changed, because you weren't really doing any new changes. You were basically giving us a cheapened version of a glamorous and big and traditional production that looked flat, and that costumes were really gaudy and just not
The
great. We're
staging is
not
not great.
flattering. The
The
staging
staging
was
is not great. There it
poorly
lacks,
directed.
with the exception,
That
you're right, with the exception of the scene, the big scene, the crowd
Yeah,
scene, the parade, the victory scene,
the triumphal
where
scene.
there are staircases. The rest of it's
Yeah,
just flat, and it looks flat, and as a result, it looks emptier.
yeah,
Because I think that is something that Sonia Frissell managed to do, which was, even during all the ceremonial stuff, there were levels that it established, and that gave it a much. I mean, it's more portraiture, but this lacks even that distinction. It does look kind of chaotic on stage, and opera is not about realism. I'm sorry,
right.
guys. Like, it's opera. People don't go around the world singing to each other. It's opera, so it's heightened. Um, it's theater. It's theatrical. It's okay to use the tools of theater at your disposal. Depth and height is one of them. Flat two dimension is also a tool, but again, diminishing returns, unless that's your intention, unless you're, the Suzanne Andrade and what's his name? The Magic Flute.
Yeah,
Uh, wow, I just blanked. The Komische Oper Berlin's Magic
right.
Flute, which
Barry
is
Kosky's.
Barry Kosky. Thank you. Sorry to Barry Kosky, for forgetting his name. That 2D, um, that's the intention, right? Of an old film. Um, unless that's the intention, which this was not. You can't just have people clotheslined across. But
I, I
anyways,
think I
sorry.
think I think that second performance that we saw, what I did see was an improvement from the cast. I mean, I think Angel Blue was 100% better now that she had more experience on the with the second cast. And I think it also worked. She worked really well with Alina Garancha, because when you have a great performer on stage like Alina Garancha, she just elevates so much of what's going on. And that's not to say that Judith Kutasi as Abneris was not great. I think she was wonderful. But I think that there was something that was working much better in the second cast with Alina Garancha and Angel Blue, that maybe because Elina didn't get to work with the original stage director. She kind of just went and did whatever she wanted to do, and she just blew everyone
Yeah, it was
out.
better for it. It was better for it.
Was better for it. And I think when you have sometimes directors, they want to over direct, and that's not to say that they don't have distinct, they don't, but I think like a production like this, and I think the same about Sonia Frissels, because everybody, who I've talked to will know that I was not the biggest fan, particularly of those costumes. I found the costumes of Sonia Frissels' production not very glamorous either. And I definitely didn't like these costumes either of this new production. But I think that one of the strongest parts about a lot of what traditional productions do is that a lot of the times the performers, they go on and they kind of find something, a new intention into the blocking, and they have more freedom. And I think that some of the best productions are when the actors are not forced to do the same exact blocking and movements, and can also have a freedom and a liberation to do something new.
Yeah,
And
to try things. Yeah.
right, while also keeping the original intentions of the directors, because we saw two Toscas this season as well, and there was a completely diverse change in both of those Toscas from the fall and then into the January performances. You saw how the second cast, third cast, because Sandra and Brian and Bryn Tervel were the third cast of this season, had completely just improvised and changed, but kept to some of David McVicker's directorial blocking. For example, the death of Scarpia. That production works so well. We're talking about Tosca now, because of what it does.
So as we wrap this up, I just want to throw out one final really positive experience that's not from the Met. I got an opportunity. The New National Theatre Tokyo brought me out to Tokyo to see Guillaume Tell, which was beautiful production, beautiful experience. The theater itself is a gem. Rene Barbera was the standout of that production, and that is definitely an experience that I will not soon forget. In terms of the operas that I saw this season, that was definitely one of the highlights. Guillaume Tell is not an easy opera to sit through; it's very long, but this particular production was quite beautiful aesthetically, and musically also. Especially Barbera, quite exciting. I hadn't had particularly great experiences in terms of past Guillaume Tell productions I'd seen, and the cast was always mixed. I'm not going to say I loved everyone in this cast, but I think that musically, I think this was definitely one of the more exciting productions that I'd seen. But yeah, so do you have any closing thoughts, friend?
I think I just want to like I think one of the most interesting performers that I saw was Christian Karg in Rusalka, as she was slithering as a kind of snake type thing in the Berlin State Opera's production, which was quite fascinating and very interesting, and that's another topic for another day. And I have to say, Lucas Meacham in Il Trovatore in Houston Grand Opera, that legato, that man has such a silvery, gorgeous voice that can spin some of the most beautiful lines I heard, that I heard this season. And the approach to that Trovatore was very interesting. And I had a really interesting conversation about it because it was very bel canto-esque. So they used a lot of variations, which I was kind of surprised about. And I wasn't sure. And I'm still kind of like figuring out whether or not that's the approach that I would want to hear, but it was still very fascinating to hear. And that was also because Patrick Summers wanted to approach it that way. So, I mean, those were some of the really interesting experiences that I definitely had.
Well, this was awesome. I'm really happy that we're finally launching this. Our goal to start will be once a month. And like I said, each topic will be its own special thing as we check out what's going on in the opera world, and as we move forward. At some point, we'll probably do a season preview. But anyways, you can find us at operawire.com. You can also find us on our social media, friend.
Our social media at OperaWire on Instagram, OperaWire News on Twitter, or X as they call it now, and OperaWire on Facebook. We're also on LinkedIn if you're all interested, and we're also on Threads. So you can follow us there. You can get all the latest updates and news, as well as interviews and as reviews that we continue publishing around the world.
Yeah, and this podcast will go up where on all podcasts applications where it's available. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you come back for more, and we'll see you guys at the opera.